we'll hear together how Matthew's gospel fulfills many of those words written in Isaiah. Let us pray. God, for your illuminating light of the Spirit, we ask to come upon us as I read the text and preach a sermon, and then it enters in. May your light shine bright and fill all of the dark spaces so that we can truly see what you have to say to us today. It is in the name of Jesus I pray. Amen. So we turn in the Gospel to Matthew 2, as we do every year, really, on this Epiphany Sunday. So listen again. Listen for the word of the Lord. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written." And a quote of the prophet, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures, and they presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One note to make. I do a lot of my reading out of the NRSV and other translations. In verse 3, when it says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. In many other translations, disturbed is actually the word frightened, which are close, right? Disturbed, frightened. I think frightened is powerful too because it speaks exactly to fear, doesn't it? So I want to start by sharing with you one of those weird memories, and you probably have them as a child, things that you remember specifically where you were, but it really had no influence on the rest of your life, but you have this very specific memory. I'm going to explain mine, and maybe it'll make sense to you, yours too. But I still remember in my youth the first time that I saw a real spotlight. And what I mean by spotlight is the spotlight, right, that's on the ground and it shines up into the sky, right? I still remember the first time I saw one of those. It was one of those things, when you think about it, that you know they exist. You've seen them in shows and movies like Batman or whatever, but you've never actually physically seen what that is like in your life. I think youth is filled with those moments until you experience it. So when I was 10 years old, we traveled to no other place than the happiest place on earth, right? Which is Disney World. And this was not in the kingdom itself. This was in Greater Kissimmee, Florida. One night we were outside, and I just remember out of our hotel motel, we were by the swimming pool, and it was night. And I looked up, and everything's magical down there, right? Because it's warm and it's cold back home. And I looked up, and I saw these lights dancing around and moving around in the kind of pink sky, right? Because we were in the city. And it was just another part of another tourist attraction, is what it was, really. But it's one of those memories, like I say, I can picture myself there, seeing it still. But those lights, whether they're part of just another tourist attraction or not, their design, their purpose, right, is to do what? Draw attraction to wherever they're from. And they did draw lots of attention to mine. Now, if I wanted to, I could have tracked them all the way down, couldn't I? I could have saw where they were illuminating and kind of noticed them and interpreted them. And then I could just walk in that direction. And after a while, I would find where they were. It was probably at something like, who knows what attraction it was at.
Papa.
Lights that guide have played a role in human travel for millennia. And the art of guiding light has gotten better and better and better, hasn't it? In our elementary Sunday school, we were talking about how we get someplace we've never been before. Well, what do we talk about now? We talk about GPS screens, right? That is just about as good as it gets. Many of you can tell the story before that, right? Before GPS screens, getting where you needed to go. And then generations before can tell the stories before that, before car maps, getting to where you needed to go, right? So we open up this story in Matthew. We have our options of things to talk about in this gospel story in Matthew. And we always have, we always will have options of things to talk about in this story. You're going to see. I want to tell you, I personally believe that too much focus and our attention is put on by some in trying to prove the cosmic happening, the reality of the star that they saw, right? What was it, in our scientific terms, that was? To prove the event right in history. I think there's too much focus on that. I understand that quest. I do. I get it. But I'm more interested, actually, in another quest than that. I'm more interested in asking and answering why the evangelist Matthew, in his storytelling, chose a star or a light to tell this part of this story. I'm interested in, as I preached on Christmas Eve night, if you were here, I'm interested in the universal reality that this story tells regarding the identity of Jesus from the very beginning on this earth. And I'm also interested in directing our attention on guiding lights that are out there still to this day. What are they, and where can we find them in this life? So that's what we're going to focus our light on, you could say, today. Matthew was really good at using light imagery, telling his story throughout his gospel. He used light imagery. He utilized it here, right? When you read it again, focus in on the light, the story that light tells. He uses it really, really well. And he also utilized it in specific messages that Jesus taught to his disciples, to us. One of Jesus' most famous teachings about his disciples comes from the book of Matthew, and it has everything to do with light in a couple different ways. He tells them to be a light to the world. You are a light for the world, he tells them. He talks about being a city. He uses this visualization, Jesus says. It's like a city on a tall hill, right? No one cannot see that, can they? And he uses another visualization. He says it's also like a dark, dark, dark room, and someone lights a candle. Just right. It lights up the whole place, doesn't it? And then he says, would you cover that? No, you would let that shine. When Matthew describes Jesus' transfiguration, which is that moment on the mountaintop where Jesus is visited, and his disciples go up there with him, that he says that he was white as light. And we can visualize what that means if you've ever stared at bright light. You can't. And then later in the empty tomb, this angel that Matthew describes was like what? He was like lightning is what he was like, Matthew tells us. For Matthew, Jesus was, everything that surrounded him was this divine light, bright light. And it all started in his storytelling here. Now the story of the Magi captures for me also some very different reactions to the light. Now this is both to the cosmic light, right, that was seen, and then to the light that is Jesus Christ here on earth. And I think in the midst of these comparisons we're going to make, we remember that it is the same light. It's the same light of Jesus that they see, that we too also see. It's the same light still today. Keep that in mind. So one piece of the celebration of Epiphany that we do is the response of the Magi to that light. First to the light that they see up above, and then to the light of Jesus. Epiphany is a celebration of the manifestation of Jesus who comes to what the Bible calls those who are Gentiles, which meant those who were outside of the Jewish faith and community, right? Because that's who the Magi were. So it is the attractiveness of Jesus to not those in Jerusalem, those way, way, way far away, the other side of the earth, essentially, right? And that reality is celebrated. That is a huge part of our faith, right? That this message is not just for a closed community, but it is for the world. And that is celebrated by retelling the story of these Magi then. And they come from far away, and they're drawn by this mysterious light to visit a new king. So Epiphany is a celebration of that. It is also a celebration, what the word means in our language so often, of the reality of a sudden insight or revelation, like the lights coming on. Aha. A turning on to the reality of something. Let us also not forget that that still happens today, does it not? I hope it does for you every now and then. Still the call for us is this, to arise, to shine, for a light has come. Like someone turns the lights on. We know the Magi, they saw the light. They studied the light, right? They saw the light, they studied the light, and then they interpreted the light to be something, and then they followed that light after their interpretation. This is a story about how they independently interpreted it to be the light of the King of the Jews. That was their conclusion when it came to Herod. So what did they do? So what they did was they traveled from where they were to the place where it would make sense for the King of the Jews, the next place where they would gather all their information from, which was Jerusalem. So they traveled to where their question might be answered. To the house of the government ruler, they ended up, of the place, who was King Herod. This is where that, when I said you can read Matthew where it says Herod was frightened, as well as disturbed, that's where this enters in. So Herod heard king from these Magi, and in another word that always has driven him, power, kicked into overdrive. at that moment. And so he reacted the way that power, not always, but most often does. And it is ready and prepared to do anything to keep your power and do away with any other power. This moment stands as a preview of Jesus' ministry, so much of speaking truth to power. It was the beginning of this struggle of the earthly powerful, right? The powerful on earth. King Herod was definitely one of them. And as we say in the Lord's Prayer, the reality of the power of Jesus. So there's powerful versus the power. And this same power struggle, friends, continues today. It does. So Herod himself, we know, wasn't particularly religious, but he was smart. So he kept particularly religious Jewish people very close to him. And he asked them to interpret this star in line with these scriptures, these Jewish scriptures. And we know his motivation was not worship, but protection of his power through the deletion of a threat. Right? The light in the sky that is at the center of all this was indeed a guiding light. It was the same light, the Magi that they saw, the same light that Herod and his buddies ended up seeing. But you know what? Sometimes power doesn't know what to do with guiding lights, does it? Because light can be really handy in guiding the way and in interpretation, but it can also be something else. Light can be blinding, light can be confusing or disorienting. So power reacts again the way that power almost always does. And there's actually kind of a funny story I want to tell you about power and about light. And you've probably heard it before. Maybe you haven't, but it's worth telling. So this story is about power and about light. Imagine two battleships. Okay, we're really taking a shift here, right? Two battleships, all right? So they're assigned to do this training squadron, and they've been at sea on maneuvers in heavy weather for several days. The story goes that someone was serving on the lead battleship in this training exercise, and they were on a watch on the bridge as night fell. The visibility was really poor with fog, so the captain too, being the captain, remained on the bridge, keeping an eye on all the activities. After dark, the lookout on the wing of the bridge reported light bearing on the starboard bow. Some of our nautical friends know the terms, right? And the captain says, "Is it steady or moving stern?" Which means, is it steady or is it moving away in any direction? The lookout replied, "It's steady, Captain," which meant that there is now on a collision course, right, with said light. The captain then called the signal man. He said, "Signal that ship this. We are on a collision course. Advise you change course 20 degrees. Back came a signal, advisable for you to change course 20 degrees. Okay, some of you know where this is going. The captain said, "Sin, I'm a captain, change course 20 degrees. The little signal came back, "I'm a seaman, second class. You had better change course 20 degrees. By that time, the captain was furious, all right? he spat out, said, "I'm a battleship, change course 20 degrees. And back came the flashing light, "I'm a lighthouse." So the battleship changed course. Not true, but tells the story, right? Sometimes power, nothing against captains, doesn't know what to do with guiding lights. But that doesn't affect the light. The light still shines. Those of you who have the imagination and the wonder, they won't be threatened by the light. They will follow the light. So the Magi did. They kept following. And they had an epiphany. Isaiah 60 again says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you." It says, "Darkness shall cover the earth, but the Lord will rise upon you," again like the sun, "and his glory will be seen upon you. And nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." The Magi's epiphany moment came in the celebration of the light settling over a destination, Bethlehem, and in worship to a very surprising king. They followed the guiding light, and it led them to a truly holy light. So then we ask ourselves the last question: do guiding lights still shine the way today? Well, that is, of course, yes. What light directs the way to the worship and the wonder of Jesus? Now, that is a real question to ask. What light directs the way to the worship and the wonder of Jesus today? I think the challenge today, when it comes to guiding lights, is different than it was then. Because, think about how many bright lights are in your life right now. Really bright lights. I mean that both in reality. Think about all the lights that surround us in advertisements and billboards now that are digital, right? They change. And TVs that are on all the time, our screens and all that. Think about all the lights that are in our lives right now. But then think about it metaphorically. Think about all the lights in your life that blind, that cause your focus, that disorient. Think about how many bright lights are shining today, maybe more than ever. Are all of those guiding lights? They're not. I have talk about lights. One of my best friends is in the lighting business. One of their main money makers is when you check out at grocery stores, you know, I don't know if you've noticed, but now things like candy bars and pop and stuff is illuminated a lot better than it used to be. Have you picked up on that? So one of their things is to specifically illuminate these products. And the vendors pay my friend's company money to engineer this light because, not for no reason, right? Why do they do that? Because people are attracted to the brightest lit up candy bar or whatnot. It's proven. So that's why they do that. There's a lot of lights in this world. Certainly, the church is called to be one of the guiding lights that shines. not on itself, but always, always guiding towards Jesus. Always. I was even reflecting myself more and more as a pastor in this role. I see myself, my role as being this kind of signal light or guiding light, showing people how to access more godliness in their lives. Because that's what guiding lights do. Their job is to help others find the way or the access. Their light is not the destination. So what are some of the guiding lights in your life? Think about that. The lights that point the way away from self to Jesus. What are some of those guiding lights? Our essential faith, the core of it, surrounds some of those lights. We believe that Scripture is how God is accessed most purely. We believe through song and through worship together that God is accessed pretty purely. We believe that through a community of people that God's light shines and shines brighter than through just the individual. And we believe through the sacraments, baptism, Lord's Supper, that through communion, that these are guiding lights, right, that shine us towards a deeper relationship with Jesus. Because in this life, there are a few realities. This is how we close it up here. One is that there are a lot of lights, and it takes wisdom to sort through all the lights. But your faith will show you how to direct yourself to the true guiding lights. The second one is that your response and others tells a lot about your relationship with the light, but maybe not so much that, but with your and others' relationship with power. And as we watch power struggles play out in our reality, let us never be guarded against the light, confused by the light that shines the way to, when we pray, the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.